Oppression and deliverance. These are major themes throughout the history of mankind. There are forces at play that will work to oppress and exploit people, and those who are being exploited and oppressed yearn for deliverance, yearn to be rescued from that condition. And that is the story that we find manifest in the book of Exodus, describing the time when Israel found itself in slavery in Egypt and telling the story of how God would rescue them out of that slavery, provide his instruction and the guidelines for the covenant that he established with Israel. The book of Exodus is almost certainly written by Moses. Jesus affirms this in Mark 12:26 and Luke 20 and verse 37, and its inspiration is affirmed by Jesus and the apostles. From the best textual evidence, if we go on the basis of what is said in the text of the Hebrew Bible, then Moses would have been going through these experiences around 1450 BC. If we just go based upon some historical things, some people think it's more like 1250 BC. The events of the narrative itself extend about 80 years, give or take a few, and would be recorded and written down within 40 years of those events. The audience is to Israel, but also, as we see in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 1 through 12, that Christians can also gain much from the story of what God had accomplished through the Israelites in the book of Exodus. What Exodus is doing is telling us the narrative, telling us the story of the Egyptian slavery these Israelites experienced, how God rescued them from that slavery, brought them to Mount Sinai, provided for them the law, the events that happened on Sinai relative to the golden calf, the giving of the Ten Commandments, the covenant code, and all of the specifications for the tabernacle and Aaron and his sons. So what's going on in the book of Exodus? Of how does all of this play out? There's two main sections. The first 19 chapters are the historical narrative that gets us from the days of Egyptian slavery to Israel at Sinai, and then chapters 20 through 40 are primarily about instruction that God is giving to Israel, mostly through Moses, regarding the law and also various things relating to the tabernacle. Within that first section, from chapters 1 through 19, we can discern three main sections. Moses' birth and calling in the first four chapters, God's deliverance of Israel from chapters 5 through 15, and then Israel getting to Sinai from chapters 15 through 18 and into 19. So the situation is told for us in chapter 1. We learn about the descendants of Jacob. We learn that there has been a Pharaoh that has arisen who did not know Joseph, and they feared the growth of Israel, and therefore they enslaved Israel. And in fact, they not only enslaved Israel, but it got to the point where Pharaoh was concerned about their multiplying, and therefore commanded the midwives to have the baby boys killed. And that is what leads us to the story of the birth of Moses, that there's a boy born who looks very good. When his parents can no longer hide him, they put him in a little basket and float him on the Nile River. It is found by Pharaoh's daughter, who has compassion on the baby and takes her into her house. And that is the boy Moses. And Moses will therefore grow up in Pharaoh's house, but he will know he is a Hebrew, that he is an Israelite. One day he will see how an Israelite is mistreated by an Egyptian, and he kills that Egyptian. The fact that that becomes known and that Pharaoh will seek his life means Moses runs away. And he runs into exile, into the land of Midian, into the desert wastes to the east. There he will marry. There he will be shepherding his flocks, we're told. And then he will come to Mount Sinai, or Mount Horeb. And he will see a burning bush in chapter 3 that is not being consumed. And he goes to investigate it, and he discovers that he is being spoken to by God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who intends to deliver his people from their bondage, and that Moses would be the means by which he would do it. There will then be a series of conversations between God and Moses. Well, Moses will keep trying to put up defeaters, and God will show him that no, that is not something to be really concerned about. involving who Moses could be to do this, who is this God who is saying these things. He just really wants in the end God to send somebody else. And God then chastises Moses. And Moses gets the hint that he needs to do this. Aaron will be his mouthpiece. He will meet Aaron, and they will go. They will speak to the Israelites, and they will believe. But Pharaoh doesn't. They go to Pharaoh. Pharaoh is asked, who is Yahweh that I should listen to him? Why should I let you guys go? And then, in fact, he punishes Israel in chapter 5 and 6 because they're clearly needing to do more work because they want some time off. And because of that, it looks worse for Moses. The Israelites complain to him. He takes their complaint to God. God assures about what's going to happen. There's going to be these plagues. Pharaoh is going to let you go. You are going to be delivered, and it will be a mighty sign to everyone. Remember, Egypt is the strongest power in the ancient Near East at this time. The pharaohs of this time are some of the strongest, best military pharaohs that would have ever existed in Egypt. They believe that they sat securely and well because of all of their gods. And what Yahweh will do is demonstrate the impotence of their gods before Yahweh, because there will be these series of plagues. The first few of them, Aaron will cast down his staff to become a serpent, so will the Egyptian magicians, but Aaron's serpent will eat all of theirs. The Nile will turn to blood because of the word of Aaron, but the Egyptian magicians are able to do the same thing. Frogs will fall from the sky. The Egyptian magicians can do the same thing. But when we get to the gnats, when Aaron is able to conjure up a swarm of gnats, the magicians recognize that as the finger of God. And yet, Pharaoh's heart remains hardened, and he still will not let the people go. The Egyptian livestock will then be killed, but the Israelite ones will be preserved. There will be boils on the Egyptians, hail on the Egyptians. Locusts will come upon their fields. There will be a darkness that can be felt. In all of these things, Pharaoh will not let the people go. Then, in chapter 11, God tells Moses that the last plague will be the death of the Egyptian firstborn. Then in chapter 12, the narrative comes to a screeching halt. From the beginning of Genesis until Exodus chapter 12, most of the story has been narrative. Most of it has told the story from the beginning through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and now on the days of Moses. But now all of a sudden we start getting instruction. We start getting laws being made. And the first thing that we're really seeing legislated is the Passover. God ordains the Passover for Israel. He makes legislation about it, commands them to keep it as a perpetual observance throughout time, and that they should explain it thus to their children. This is their Independence Day. They need to observe that by acting like they are also in Egypt, ready to leave, eating the unleavened bread and the bitter herbs, and having slaughtered the Passover lamb. God kills the firstborn of Egypt. Pharaoh commands to let Israel go. The Israelites plunder the Egyptians as had been prophesied. They travel, and then all their sojourn is encapsulated there. Then we get some instruction about the redemption of the firstborn based upon how the Passover happened. But then Israel is sitting there at the Red Sea at Pi-hahiroth. And Pharaoh repents and sends his army, the great Egyptian army, the mightiest force in the world, against the Israelites. And God has explained this is also that God will get the glory over Egypt. There's a cloud between the Egyptian army and the people of Israel. God then parts the Red Sea so that the Israelites can walk on dry land, and they cross the Red Sea. The Pharaoh's army pursues them. Their chariots get stuck in the mud. God causes havoc and confusion. They are not able to actually attack Israel. They are stuck in the bottom of the Red Sea, and then the waters return, and they are covered, and they all perish. The Israelites therefore believe that Yahweh is God and is their God and has delivered and rescued them. God has demonstrated his power over the Egyptians. All the things the Egyptians thought were being controlled by other gods, Yahweh has hindered them. Yahweh has caused them great distress, and now Yahweh has destroyed their army. The Israelites now had reason to know who Yahweh was and to fear him. And so would all the other nations around Israel because of these events, because of how this went down. Moses would recount this by his song in chapter 15. Now from here until chapter 19, we have the movement to Sinai. They're in the wilderness, it's called. The area of the Sinai Peninsula, maybe in the northwest Saudi Arabia, it has always been desert land. It has been inhospitable climate. There are not a lot of sources or food or drink, especially not for any significant group of people. And that is why throughout this story, God will have to provide them water in various ways. Once a log is thrown into salty water to make it not salty. Where there's no water, a rock is struck and water will come from the rock. Where are they going to eat food? Well, God will provide for them the manna. Manna is just ma-na, or what is it in Hebrew? It's something they can't really describe. It's a kind of starchy thing, kind of like you make cakes out of it, and they would eat it, and it would provide them sustenance. They even preserve some of it that would go in eventually into the Ark of the Testimony, the Ark of the Covenant, as a reminder of all these things that took place. The Amalekites will come and fight Israel here in the wilderness, and God will give them victory and promise to blot Amalek out. They will eventually reach Mount Sinai, and God then prepares them at Mount Sinai to be holy so that he can speak to them. And then in chapter 20, God speaks to them. God speaks to them his 10 words. And those 10 words, the 10 commandments, begin with Yahweh is their God, who has led them out of Egyptian slavery. He has proven to be their God, a strong God, a God worth listening to, and therefore they need to honor him and to fulfill the commandments. They should have no other gods before him. They shall not bow down to or serve another God. They shall not take his name in vain. They need to remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. They need to honor their fathers and mothers. They need to not commit adultery or to steal or to kill, to bear false witness, or to covet anything, to earnestly, greedily desire anything that belongs to their neighbor. That is the base of all those words are spoken by God to all the people. But all the people are freaked out. They're scared. They don't want to hear it from God anymore. They're afraid they're going to die. So they say, Moses can go up. Moses will receive the message from God. And then Moses can come and bring that message down to them. So Moses goes up Sinai. And in chapters 21, 22, 23... we get what we often call the Covenant Code. It is a series of laws that are given to Israel that are kind of commentary on the Ten Commandments. They involve all kinds of things from what happens if somebody commits idolatry, to what you do with slaves, to dealing with murder, dishonoring of parents, kidnapping, fights and violence, oxen, theft, when restitution needs to take place, when you use capital punishment, how you treat the poor, dispossessed, and sojourners, and so on and so forth. These are the kind of laws that are being discussed here that God is giving to Moses to give to Israel. And this will go through chapter 23. In chapter 24, we're told that Moses, now with Aaron and the elders of Israel, now stand before God. The law is affirmed. We're told Moses is on this mountain for 40 days and nights. And now we have the specifications, the schematics that are being given for the place where God will maintain his presence in Israel, the tent or the tabernacle. And so all of the specifications for the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant, the table of the bread of the presence, the curtains and the accessories, its coverings, all of those things, the altar, all of that are laid out in Exodus from chapters 24 and 25 all the way through into 30. By chapter 31 now, it's going to be Oholiab and Bezalel and others who are strengthened to do the work, and they're called to actually make all these things that God has specified for Israel. God will even write the 10 commandments, the 10 words, on tablets of stone and give to Moses. Then we get chapter 32. In chapter 32, we get back to some narrative events. We return to the scene of the Israelites waiting for Moses on Sinai. They're all wondering what happened to Moses. They're convinced he's gone, that he's not coming back. And they command Aaron to make a god for them that they can worship. And so he makes for them the golden calf, and they honor it and they serve it. God knows about this. God becomes very mad about this. God wants to wipe them all out and to make a people out of Moses. And Moses begs for him not to do that, to consider what the Egyptians and everybody else will say. God relents of his anger, but there will be consequences. Moses comes down, breaks the tablets of the 10 Commandments. He takes that golden calf, melts it down, turns it into powder, and puts it in their water source for them to drink, to realize that it has no strength, it has no power. Aaron tries to explain what happened. He does not exactly tell the truth. Moses wants to know who's on God's side, and it's the Levites. This is why the Levites will be the sanctified, separated out people in Israel. They will go and kill like 3,000 of the Israelites. There are all these plagues that will come upon Israel because of what they had done. And so the people are chastised. They realize they've done wrong. And now God and Moses will meet in the tent. That is where God and Moses will speak so that the people know Moses hasn't gone too far. The tablets, God writes again on them so the people may have that word. Moses wants to see God, and he is able to see the back of God passing by. And Moses has to keep a veil on his face when he's around the Israelites because his face is shining from being in the presence of God. Contributions are made, Bezalel, Aholiab are called, and then most of the rest of Exodus is the completion, the creation of all those things. The tabernacle is made, the altars are made, the ark is made, the clothing for Aaron is made, and then at the end of chapter 40, the presence of God, the cloud fills the tabernacle. God maintains his presence there with the people, and we have this wonderful closure. So what do we see going on here in Exodus? So many important themes going on. We see the Passover. The Passover is going to have a lot of resonance throughout history. In fact, there'll be a Passover that Jesus will suffer and die because just as God delivered the Israelites from bondage of Egypt, so through Jesus, God is delivering us from the bondage of sin and death. A lot of resonance there. The deliverance of the Red Sea is very important. It's also the beginning of the kind of allegory that Paul is using in 1 Corinthians 10, understanding what happened to Israel in the wilderness in terms of what God does with Christians to warn us to not live and act like they live and act, especially with the golden calf incident. Hebrews author will talk about how the Israelites were afraid of hearing God's voice at Sinai and compare and contrast that to how we now come to stand before God at Mount Zion. The Ten Commandments, of course, are of great importance. The pattern that Israel was to follow in Exodus 25 and verse 40, and Moses' shining face. And Paul will use that in 2 Corinthians 3 and talk about how there's that veil that's over the heart that needs to be taken off in Christ to truly understand the mystery of God. The Israelites in Exodus, therefore, go from slavery to freedom. From not knowing where they stood with God to being the people of God. And Genesis began with God dwelling in the midst of people in the gardens where heaven and earth met. God dwelt with people there. Exodus ends with God dwelling among his people where heaven and earth meet in the tabernacle, in the tent. And so we're supposed to see that kind of closure there in a very real and profound way. And that's the power of the message of Exodus, God's great working, and we should take strength and encouragement from it. I'm Ethan, work at the Venice Church of Christ. We're disciples making disciples in Los Angeles. We're so glad that you've joined us, and we hope that you've been encouraged by this message. If you have any questions or comments, please let us know. Make some comments, continue our conversation. Subscribe to us where you found us. If we can be of any further service, please reach out to us at VeniceChurchOfChrist.org. You can find us on Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Threads, and YouTube. May the Lord bless and keep until we meet again.